Yo, what's up everyone? It's your boy 𝙁𝙚𝙣 and you're back again with another video. So today I just wanted to go ahead and make another video. Obviously it's almost been a year since I converted to Islam, and I just wanted to go ahead and make another video indicating as to why I've done so. But let me go ahead and begin by stating this video is mostly for friends and family. So friends and family, hello, hopefully you all are doing well. I wanted to make this video as a reason as to why I converted to Islam and why there are potential solutions in it that may help the people in the world today. Now, this video is not going to be super long. I already kind of came up with an idea of what I'm going to talk about, so let me just get right into it. So when we talk about Islam, some people may come up with the ideologies or come up with things in their head from things they've been taught from the media over the course of the last maybe 2 to 3 decades. And when I say this, I wanted to make it very clear that first of all, that Islam is not a religion for terrorists. Islam isn't a religion that oppresses women. Islam isn't a violent religion at all. And Islam is honestly just a way to create peace amongst other people. I'm sure that some people may have a lot of questions when it comes to Islam, but I'm here to pretty much answer any questions that you may have. If any of my friends or family are watching this, feel free to message me or leave a comment down below and just continue to let me know what you think. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the fitrah. Now, Muslims believe that this is the innate disposition to believe in God only or to submit to his will. The reason why this already stood out to me when I first became Muslim is because I remember perfectly when I was a little kid, there was like a time when I was playing outside on the playground. And when I was playing on the playground, I looked at the sky, I saw the sun shining through the clouds, and it was like an orangish kind of like sherbet kind of color. And just looking up, it wasn't like I remembered my family telling me I was special. It wasn't like as if I remembered, like in a sense that I'll remember what I learned in Sunday school. It was at that time and at that specific moment that I just felt something within me that said that I am protected and I am loved and that there is something there guiding me and watching me. Now, this really stood out to me as a kid because, like, when I was a kid, that's the main reason why I believed in something. And even as I got older and I started learning secular education, the things that people try to explain within science and physics or any kind of weird theology, I necessarily didn't believe in it 100%. And the reason why is because when you learn a lot about polytheism versus monotheism, monotheism in the end always just made clear and utter sense to me. And as you get older, you start learning about different religions that do have a lot of different similarities. However, those similarities are not as similar in a sense that you think. For example, a lot of people will say, hey, it doesn't matter what religion you practice as long as you're good and kind to other people. Now, this may sound like an idealistic truth, but let's just be honest here. How many people do you know that don't necessarily practice or even follow religion and they still are not good people? Religion does teach people how to be good. However, even if without religion, religion is still necessary within our lives. And people try to make it seem like we don't necessarily need to be religious in a sense in order to be good people, but I totally disagree. For example, I stepped away from Christianity, and when I became a spiritual person, I said to myself that I will return to God, and if there is a God, then guide me back to you, but I'm going to go and live my life anyway. When I was living my life, I try to keep in mind God at all times, and I always try to make sure that in any kind of decision I made, I try to remember him. But to be honest with you, there was a lot of times where I didn't even care about those sort of things, and I just did what I wanted to do anyway. In Islam, we have this thing called taqwa, and taqwa is having the remembrance of Allah at all times. And it means in every little thing that you do. For example, when you're going to a restaurant and you know that a waiter has not been on her best behavior, she hasn't been the best waiter, and you're getting your food, the food may not have been good the first time, you ask for another plate, the waiter's giving you an attitude. The whole thing is in this situation is that even though you may be clearly upset that the waiter is not fulfilling your needs when it comes to service, you gotta understand that God is still watching you at all times, and however you treat this individual is going to say a lot when you pass away. Hey, this is me just editing after the fact and kind of trying to give more clarity as far as what I mean. Now, when it comes to this, just think about it in the sense of like, what would Jesus do when it comes to Christianity? When you try to figure out what would Jesus do in a sense, you will try to be more cognizant of how you're acting toward other people and be more respectful and polite. Because on the day of judgment, God will hold account even the words that you say to other people and how you treated them. So just be cognizant. And so you may want to treat the waiter with some kindness and understanding. And so with that being said, like that's the one thing about the fitrah and taqwa that we need to have as Muslims in order to live our day-to-day lives. And even before I was Muslim, I had somewhat of this taqwa, and I believed in some innate disposition, and that is called the fitrah within Islam. The next subject I want to talk about is guidance. Now, when people think about Islam, people think that Islam is a religion that's led by Satan, or it's some evil religion that's spread by the sword, or something along the lines of that, like I stated before. But this is the reason why I don't necessarily believe in that, and the reason why is because there's evidence to suit the contrary. Now, this is a part where a lot of Muslims already heard, and my Muslim friends have already heard specifically as to why I became Muslim, and I always talk about this woman a lot. And the woman that I'm speaking of is my great-grandmother that passed away back in 2013. My great-grandmother was a religiously devout Christian woman, and she was very much on what we call deen in Islam, in a sense. My great-grandmother believed in a lot of things. For one thing is that men don't wear earrings, and I used to wear earrings. I've taken them out a little after I became Muslim, after a few experiences, and just kind of questioning myself, why am I wearing earrings to begin with? Another thing that she kind of taught is that you need to have a career path, you need to have a goal, you need to have a job that you are going to work towards that's going to be able to suitably provide for you and your family, and that men do need to work. And she didn't believe in a lot of things, like, the holiday Christmas and how it's celebrated, or Easter, for example. If anything, she always related it back to Isa, or Jesus, peace be upon him, and how he lived his life and how he taught people of that time to live their lives. Another thing she didn't believe in is worshiping idols. And when I say worshiping idols, in a sense, like when you look at the 10 commandments, the first commandment is to believe that God is one and to not make any graven images or idols of him. So as Muslims, we believe in those two basic principles. And honestly, Islam is honestly those main two. Believing that God is one and that he has no partners. And then secondly, believing that, and two, making no graven images of God or his prophets. And so when I use that as an example, as for my great-grandmother, I remember there was a time when me and my brothers played in a play for Christmas one time, and we played as the three wise men at this church. And I remember after our scene was done, us giving the gifts to Jesus in the cradle, we initially sat back down, and I sat next to my great-grandmother. One thing that I said is that I love the fact that we're celebrating this, and I love the play and all these other things. I hope that I did a good job. And she was like, you did great, but let me just make it clear that, like, this is just for, this is for historical purposes. We shouldn't even be making images of the prophets or anything like that. Another thing is that we don't mock the prophets. We don't mock Jonah. We don't mock Abraham. We don't mock David. We don't mock any of the prophets that came before, because we believe that these prophets were sent by God once again, and that these people were given a message that we should love these prophets, we should cherish them, and understand that their lives was one of suffering, but they too were amazing figures. Another thing she said was not to mock the prophets. A lot of people believe in worshiping Jesus, but my great-grandmother necessarily didn't believe in worshiping Jesus. We believe that Jesus was sent by God, and that we follow behind Jesus to live our lives in such so that way we will be granted paradise. Now, I will indicate and say, like, I'm not too sure if my great-grandmother believed in the crucifixion or believed in the Trinity. Those things I still don't necessarily remember. I can't say for sure. But what I can say is that one thing's for sure is that she definitely believed that we just follow Jesus. We don't worship him in any way, and we only worship God. And in a sense, that is literally another thing within Islam, is that we say La ilaha illallah, and that means that we worship none but God only. And so, like, even when it comes to that, we don't mock the prophets, we don't make fun of them. We accept the fact that they brought a message, and that message should be a message that is spread to everyone, and it's a sacred message, and it's something that obviously should be respected. This isn't something that we should just make fun of, and society obviously has no recollection or has no respect for any of the prophets. As you can tell, they've made a lot of things in regards to Isa, or Jesus, peace be upon him. They made a lot of different translations about what he said. They've done they made pictures of him. They've drawn him in inappropriate manners. Obviously, it's gotten to a point now where people don't even respect people's religion anymore. It's all about political agenda. And I will get into the political agenda in a bit, but I'm just going to stick to the rest of this part. And another thing that my great-grandmother told me that stood out to me, which is also somewhat traditional, and it's not just in Islam that they practice these things. It's in other cultures too, I will admit. However, this is much this is very much emphasized because this goes into another point I'm about to make in the next part. And goes back to saying that men don't live with their girlfriends or anybody until they're married. I remember there was a time with my great grandmother where I was sitting with her, and I remember like all my friends at the time were graduating school, and they were talking about specifically living with their girlfriends and stuff like that. And I said like I wanted to do the exact same thing. My great grandmother obviously just said like that is totally incorrect. That's not what people should do. People should want to get married first and then they live with one another. That is the proper order of how things are done. And at the time, when I'm young, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but, I just want, it'll be great because I think we'll be able to connect more. We'll be able to establish more of a relationship if we were just to live together. But I will say nowadays, as I've seen relationships kind of go to crap, it makes a lot of sense as to why you should get married first before you decide to live with someone. And once again, we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit, but let me go on ahead to the next point. So this next one I want to emphasize a lot because this is something that I think a lot of people do not think about, nor people really care to talk about nowadays. And that is talking about the state of the world that we're currently living in. Now, I can go into so many examples as to what's going on nowadays that I totally disagree with and I totally do not align with anymore, and things that I'm definitely going to not sugarcoat, and I am not going to shy away from it, and we're going to get into that right now. So first of all, I want to talk about the system that we live in. Now, the system, when I say system, I'm not talking about like the Matrix that a lot of people like to bring up in the red pill sphere. I'm talking about literally living in the system when it comes to our government, when it comes to our policies, when it comes to our criminal justice system, our prison system, and even when it comes to our capital system, when it comes to like making money, when it comes to corporate and things of that nature. There's so many things that I can go on a tangent about and list it, particularly in regards to these things that are corrupt and they're totally wrong. But let's be honest here. We all know that there's stuff wrong with our criminal justice system. We all know that there's something wrong with our government. We all know there is a political agenda to push all these liberal ideologies down our throats and to go ahead and accept them. And also just going through the motions of the court system, and also the imprisonment system, like how people get imprisoned for so long, stuck behind bars, in order for them to potentially try and change and have get on their best behavior. But let's be honest, like how long is that really going to take? Everybody is different. Everyone is not the same. And for us to throw people into jail, lock them up for not hundreds of years, but lock them up for about a decade or so or less is totally inhumane and is totally not right. And one solution I feel like to me that I learned within Islam is the Sharia law. Now, a lot of people might think, oh my God, Sharia law. Like that's when if you steal something, they cut your arm off and like and you're pretty much punished for that, or you get lashed a whole bunch of different times. But let me just say something. As times has progressed and people have made rulings within Islam, different scholars and different imams and different people of jurisprudence that learn the laws and regulations within Islam have come to the conclusion that Islam is not as cut and dry as that. Now, let's just say, for example, you steal something because you are desperate. You needed a piece of fruit. You were hungry, and like there's a homeless guy and he goes and steals a piece of fruit. He steals like some candy from a store because he's hungry or whatever may have you. We're not going to automatically just go to the conclusion of chopping his arm off just because he stole something from the store out of desperation. If anything, we have to have compassion toward his situation and understand that not everyone does things out of malice. Not everyone does things in a way to harm other people or just to blatantly just be conniving and steal from other people. Sometimes people really are desperate and they do need things. And sometimes when someone steals something, they do it out of desperation because they are hungry. And so the Sharia has leniency to that. We understand that people are not perfect, and we understand that people are going to have issues. So for people to automatically think that you're going to get your arm cut off because of some nonsense of stealing some food, that's not necessarily the case. And also, when it comes to that, like there is not to say that is totally disregarded. So I want to make that very, very clear that necessarily isn't disregarded. But I will emphasize a lot on this point that when it comes to stealing and you're getting your arm cut off for something, this is as if you are a repeated offender. Like if you're doing something blatantly and you don't have no remorse, you're just constantly doing it over and over again, and you're costing people, businesses, money, you're doing all these things kind of like fraudsters. And that's when we take action and say this person needs to be disciplined more severely. Now, to say to cut off a limb nowadays is a little is a little far-fetched. That's not necessarily always the case nowadays, but that ruling is still there. So this is just a different example as to like what could be done when it comes to our justice system and what can be implemented differently instead of trying to automatically come to the conclusion of throwing somebody into a box for 10 years and like letting them rot. And that's something that also Islam does not encourage. I mean, if you do something bad, yeah, you're put into prison, but it's not to say you're put in so incredibly long that you just pretty much rot in there. You're pretty much treated like a human being. You're treated as if like you're still, you still are human, if that makes any sense. Like, you don't just get thrown into jail, getting fed crappy food, not educated. Like, you get certain things within prison. And also just wanted to emphasize also a little bit that when it comes to the Sharia, a lot of our government, believe it or not, as someone has actually done security work in the past, there is a little bits and pieces of each kind of individual jurisprudence of a nation or a culture that the government actually does already implement. For example, for an eye for an eye. So if you do something bad, and if you do something bad that can be incriminating, and you get time for it, that is considered, in a sense, an eye for an eye. This is actually implemented within our justice system to this day, and this is something that people do not really know much about. Like, this is still happening to this day, and this is something that we still utilize. Hence why you even look at the pendulum, when you look at the scale, when it goes up and down, that is technically what an eye for an eye is. The second thing I want to talk about is men and women losing their roles. Now, let's just be honest here. Like, nowadays, like, it feels like the world, and for people that are already married and people have been married for years, this is not to say that, like, everyone is like this, but this is to indicate in some sense that this is happening and people need to acknowledge it. And when I talk about this is in regards to relationships with how men and women are. Now, this is part of like, this is like kind of like a dual part, but I'm just going to include everything together. So first, we want to talk about the men losing and women losing their roles. In a sense, nowadays, people are now embracing different types of culture. People are embracing the LGBT, they're embracing polyamorous relationships. People are embracing a lot of different things, and a lot of people are actually confused on like why these things are and how to actually navigate them in some sense. But see, the thing is, even in Islam, those things have already existed. For example, when it came to the LGBT community, like, we understood that God makes people in a certain way, and we're not here to judge them, and we're not here to bash them, but at the same time, we have to be very much clear on like what is correct and what is right. Now, everybody's going to have their own personal opinion on what is right and what is wrong. That is not to say that's the case, but it's also to come to the realization is this the minority or is this the majority? And is the LGBT the new majority or is it the minority? Now, we can go into statistics and we can go into a lot of different things, but I always choose the latter and say that the LGBT community is not the majority, it's actually a minority, and that people wish to practice things, and that's perfectly fine. But do not push the agenda that everyone has to accept that. If you want to practice something in your own, you can practice it within your household, and then khalas, end of story. You can do that. That is your right, and as a person, as an American, especially, to go and practice that in your own household. But to actually try to force that ideology onto other people is not correct. And when it comes to men and women losing their roles, nowadays, men are becoming, I guess you could say, men are not as employed, they're not as educated anymore as women are. There's more women getting educated and getting better jobs. And so men are kind of like in the background, not really doing much with their lives except just playing games, eating junk food, not going to the gym. Like, there's a lot of statistics we can pull up in this, but it will take it will be a long video, and I choose not to make it super long. But you can look up these statistics yourself, you can look it up. And even when it comes to women in relationships, women are having a harder time nowadays to find a potential partner to at least match them in a sense of where they are as far as their work ethic. And this speaks levels. And the reason why it speaks levels is because nowadays, even as a guy myself that came from being more spiritual, living in this red pill, which you can look up yourself also, mind state, it is hard to find someone that actually understands you and is comfortable with you without trying to force you into a lifestyle that you just do not want for yourself. Personally, as a man, I will say that even when it comes to my faith, like, I do not care for this world. One thing as a Muslim, we very much emphasize is that this dunya is temporary. This world is temporary. We're not going to be here forever. We only get a span of 100 years, if probably less than that, to even live. So what is the purpose of stressing and worrying about things that we cannot control? And so that's the whole thing when it comes to the dunya. It's not to say you don't work. It's not to say you don't have goals, but at the same time, you don't put this on a pedestal. And nowadays people are putting this dunya, this world, on a pedestal, and it doesn't need to be worshipped. If anything, what really needs to be worshipped is the creator himself. And so like, this is just an example as far as relationships go, like where like things stand. And honestly, my personal opinion, men are becoming weaker and women becoming more educated, and they're having more standards, like more than they ever had before. And sometimes I will be even lenient enough to say that those standards are not so bad as you think. Some women just want a man to make just as much money as they do. And the average American, or the average person here in the States or in the country, makes average about $50,000 to $60,000 a year, give or take. Now, if that's all you got to do, you can go to school for 4 years, get your degree, go get certified in some things, and get a job that will land you a position that makes $45,000 to $50,000 a year, even that. If not that, even more. And then you can just go on ahead and understand that women not only just want a man to make money and all these other things, and money is not necessarily the only key factor, but they want a guy to also help around the house, to help out with the kids, to help out with the chores, to clean up after themselves. These minute things that a lot of people nowadays think is taboo to like say, like if a man's coming home to make a lot of money, he's making a lot of money and he comes home, that his wife should just automatically clean and make his dinner and all these other things. To me, this is totally invalid, and this is totally not acceptable, because if you didn't have a woman in your life, then what would you be doing without that woman? Would you be just letting your clothes pile up on the floor? Would your food be cooking itself? Would you just be ordering like $20, $30 every single day for DoorDash and getting food delivered to you? Like, what would you necessarily be doing in that regard? Right? These are things that you have to ask yourself. And like, this is things that women just really want a guy to do, just to help around and help her out in times of need. Now, I will say also that a lot of women have really high standards nowadays when it comes to finance. And when it comes to finances, people need to be realistic with themselves and understand that everyone is going to reach that six-figure mark. We are normal human beings that have our own normal lives, and I can be content. You can find a man that makes $30,000 to $40,000 a year, and he can be perfectly content with the amount of money that he's making. He doesn't need to make a whole bunch of money in order to make himself happy. He can make just enough to pay his bills, to get by just enough. He can have a little hoopty car and live in a nice little tiny apartment and keep it nice and clean and tidy, have a cat, maybe have an animal with him. He's perfectly content. As far as other people think like you gotta have like this luxury home, you gotta have this luxury apartment, this townhome, this condo, this patio, anything that you have, it has to be super luxurious, even when it comes to your car and the way that you dress. To me, I'm a big minimalist, and I do not care specifically for how I dress. I bought this sweater, or this sweater specifically from Walmart, and it was only like $15. It fits me comfortably, it makes me look good, and also I personally it was cheap. It wasn't something that I needed to put a lot of thought into. Now, I'm not saying this is the case for every single thing that you buy. Sometimes things that you buy need to be premium quality. However, not every single thing in your life needs to be premium quality. If anything, if you want to utilize examples as to why shouldn't they be premium quality, let's look at the CEOs of the biggest CEOs of the world, and let's see how they conduct and live their lives. Like, for example, Steve Jobs, this man used to walk around the office with shoeless, wear a regular sweater with some jeans, walk around. You didn't see him in Gucci or Prada. You didn't see none of those things. Like, there's different things that businessmen actually do that save them money in areas that people don't think matter. And it's very keen on how people perceive that, because that tells you exactly where their mindset is. Me again, so I just wanted to go ahead and also add the whole purpose of me speaking on this so long is the simple fact that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and other prophets before him didn't live luxurious lives. They didn't live in a life of luxury. They lived in the desert. They lived in tiny homes. They didn't really have a whole bunch of stuff. Like, they were very humble, modest living people that honestly just did what they could for a living. And the whole purpose of me speaking on this particular topic and being humble and not spending a whole bunch of money is for the simple fact that we all should just kind of strive to live like the prophets. And in Islam, we're highly encouraged to do that. So this goes on to the next part of the topic. So I think like this is the most controversial one out of all of them that I really want to touch on. And this one is touching on the biblical errors and within the Bible, obviously. Now, this is something that even myself, I struggle with to this day, but I will submit to in a sense, or concur in a sense, that there's some things within the Bible that just do not make sense. And there's just so many names and so many stories and so many parables within the Old Testament and the New Testament that some things just do not align, and it confuses even the average person. For example, even when you go to Bible study or you go to Bible school, like you learn all these things, but you learn the basic stories. You don't learn anything else except like the main prophets or the main people or the main characters within the Bible, and like what they did and what they learned and all these other things. And that is all they learn. They don't learn anything else specifically. And so the next thing I wanted to touch on in regards to that is because like we can go, I'll just use like one primary example that honestly made me question pretty much everything that I've learned. And this is within the Old Testament. I will concur to that. But at the same time, this is very much important that we discuss it. In the Old Testament, there is a passage that says that God is not a man that he should sin, nor is he a man that should he repent, or something along the lines of that. I'm not the biggest Bible person. And so when it comes to that, when it comes to learning that, there's something in Islam that talks about La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, and that means that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is his messenger. And there is a surah, or there's a chapter within the Quran that says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And the rough translation of that is that say that there is nothing but God, and that there is nothing like him, that he neither begets nor is he begotten, that he's above all, and something along the lines of that. I'm terrible with the translation. So in this sense, like this part of the Bible and this part of the Quran are very much in sync with one another. And we can go into a lot of different details, but I will just indicate also that the Jews themselves also recognize Muhammad to be some sort of Nebi, or which they call a messenger in Arabic. And so like there's a lot of indications on like why he's actually a prophet and a messenger. And so a lot of Jews actually acknowledge this. Like even some top rabbis within the faith of Judaism actually acknowledge that Muhammad was some sort of monotheistic prophet that came along to the Arabs. And there's also some indications within the Bible, like I can go for days, but you can look up and research these things yourself, that there's actually testimonials in the Bible that kind of indicate that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually was going to come to be. And the biggest one, I think, in my personal opinion, that kind of convinced me of this, that does make some sort of sense, because there is no connection directly to the Injil, or they call it the New Gospel, or the Gospel of the New Testament to the Quran itself. And that all comes down to Ishmael. Ishmael is one of the sons of Abraham. And obviously, you know the story of Abraham and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Pretty much Hagar was a slave, I think a servant woman of his wife. I can't remember his wife's name at that time, but his wife wasn't able to beget any children. So she gave her servant woman, her slave woman, to him to have children with it. And they birthed Ishmael. Obviously, later on, Allah, or God, actually gave the permissibility to his wife to birth Isaac. And of course, over time, his wife actually saw Ishmael kind of taunting Isaac, and so she wanted him and Hagar to be banished to the desert. And so Abraham didn't know what to do in this regard, but God spoke to him and said, do as your wife says and send him away. It's perfect. Trust in me, for I will make your son into a great nation. Now, this is not later emphasized within the Bible at all, nor is it really much emphasized at all within the Torah or the Talmud. There isn't any kind of indication of what links directly to Ishmael. And this is something that the Muslims, or people of the people of Islam, believe, that this is an indication that Muhammad was to come. And so in the Quran, it continues to say that Hagar and Ishmael was sent directly to the desert. They walked between two mountains, And the two mountains, she was walking between two mountains to find water for Ishmael because he was, thirsty. He was, they were starving, thirsty. And so she prayed that somebody would help her and all these things. And so Allah, her God, sent the angel Jibril or Gabriel to go ahead and say that I've been sent from your Lord, and that I will him to give you water and sustenance and things like that. He has heard your prayer. He punctured a hole within the earth with his wing, and water started gushing forward. And she said, stop like 2 times, because supposedly the well was just endless and it kept gushing up forward. And so this is a story that continues into Ishmael's story. And if you actually if you actually do your research and actually look this up, the well of Zamzam, which is what is called, that the angel Gabriel had punctured a hole into, that well is only about 60 or some feet away from the Kaaba, which is the black stone or black rock, the square rock within Mecca that the Muslims go around and circle around and they pray towards every single day. This stone was actually created by Ishmael and his father Abraham when he came to visit him in the desert to make sure that he was okay over the years. And this to this day is an indication that Ishmael birthed generations up until the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Prophet is one of the final messengers of Islam. Now, some people may take this how they want. People might hear this and might think it's a little shaky. Once again, feel free to do your own research and actually come up with a better solution or come up with a better reason as to why Islam is not the truth. I'm very much surprised that a lot of the things that I'm saying is already taught to a lot of new Muslims, and a lot of people do convert after hearing these particular stories. But let me just go ahead and conclude on one thing. I made this video pretty long. I wanted to conclude by saying this. Islam is a beautiful religion, and when you actually take the time to learn it and understand it, you'll understand that there's things and elements about it that preach pure monotheism, what we call Tawheed in Islam, which means that we just believe in God only, we worship God only, we don't worship no monkeys, no graven images of him, no statues, no nothing, not even the prophets themselves. We worship God alone. And some people might say, if you're Christian, some people might say, well, for example, that God himself, some Christians may say, well, where does Jesus come into this? There's almost like parts and chapters for Mary and Jesus within the Quran that you just have to read for yourself and come to understand about it. I will admit that there's not a lot emphasized on Jesus when it comes to the Quran, but supposedly within a hadith, which is other sayings and teachings of the Prophet that have been narrated through a chain of narrations, they indicate more stories within that and give a better explanation of the chain. But as far as like the details of his life, there isn't really much of any within Islam. Some people might say, oh yeah, see, like they don't have much to say about Jesus. They don't really have a real answer, like if he was crucified or things like that. And in our Quran, it says that Jesus was actually spared from the cross and that God put someone in his stead to make it seem like it was him. However, some people might agree, some people might disagree, but if you actually look into the Council of Nicaea, and you actually look before that, when it came to the Judeo-Christians, there was an ideology within the Judeo-Christian faith called Arianism, and Arianism was a religion or more of an ideology within the faith that Jesus was just a prophet and that God had sent him and that he wasn't crucified. And if you can do your own research and look this up. This is something that we were taught back in high school. Some people might not remember, but this is something that I particularly remember, and it made sense to me. It made more sense to me than him being put to a cross and crucified for our sins and things of that sort. Now, it's not to bash anyone's religion. This video is not to convert anyone. This video is just to simply say why I've embraced Islam, and for my friends and family that have questions, this is just to pretty much clear up any of the reasons as to why I've done it and the reasons why I made specific changes within my life, and I'm continuing to make changes within my life because the world is in a disarray. People nowadays have lost their way. Depression has gone up. Suicide is going up. There's a lot of different issues within the relationship dating sphere that is going to absolute crap. And when it comes to education, people are starting to leave education. There's actually been studies done when it comes to people, like men specifically, are leaving college. They're not going to college, they're dropping out, and they're not going back to school simply because it's too expensive and they're understanding that they can't compete and it's just simply not for them anymore. For me, I was one of those people. To me, I always contemplated on going to school. I love education, I love to learn, but the way that the system is set up in a way for you to actually go to school, it teaches you to the test. It doesn't teach you to just to learn and embrace everything that you learn and implement it in your own life. It teaches you to get a degree and teaches you to take that degree and go to a job, and that job accepts you and you get a good job. That is what the system is set up nowadays when it comes to education. So in general, what I'm all trying to aim at here is like, these are different things that in my life that led me to Islam. And right before I converted, there was like a sister that talked to me, and I used to drink. As everyone knows on my Facebook page, if you keep up with me on there, you come to find out that I stopped drinking. And one thing that I had a conversation with this one sister about is that Muslims do not drink because it is prohibited within the faith. And to me, I thought it was silly because even in Christianity, you're not supposed to get drunk, but you can still drink. And so I wondered why that was. And it's because, in a sense, you cut off, and the perfect example for this is that if you see a weed, if you keep cutting off the top of the weed that's on the surface of the grass, the weed continues to grow back and grow back and grow back. The only time the weed stops growing is when you get the roots and pull it out. And so when you're drinking and when you're having some substance issues, the best way to do it is cut it out by the root. Now, I took a strong way and actually just cut it out altogether because I know myself and I think I can manage it pretty well. And I haven't drinking since May of last year, so it's almost been a year since I haven't drank. But Islam also teaches you to take your time. And there's a lot of things in Islam that people may have questions about. You can feel free to once again message me. But it's all about taking your time and learning and actually reading and understanding the faith instead of trying to come up with these biases and these kind of stereotypical prejudices that people have painted Islam to be. Now, there's going to be always people within both faiths, within Islam and Christianity, Hinduism, doesn't matter where you go, there's going to be people that practice that faith that are just genuinely bad people. And it's not to say we clear off the whole rest of history of like certain things that have happened and what didn't happen. But it is to say that this religion is all about peace, it's all about tranquility, it's all about submitting to God, and it's all about His mercy and everything like that. If you actually look at what Islam means, it honestly just means submission. A Muslim is called a person that submits, which comes from the word aslama, which means a person who submits their will to God. It doesn't mean some person that follows Muhammad or anything like that. It's literally just submitting to God. And we believe that this is a religion that's been passed down since Abraham himself. If you have any questions, once again, just feel free to hit me up. Please let me know what you think, friends and family. And anybody that has like any kind of concern, just feel free to reach out. I'm glad to answer other questions. The purpose of this video, once again, is to explain as to why I converted to Islam, so it doesn't shake or spook anyone. This is honestly just a new way of life that I've chosen, and honestly, it's been a good one. If you guys like the video, please hit the thumbs up. Please hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel, and please hit the bell notification if you have anything that you want to check on when it comes to my content. I love all of you and all of my Muslim brothers and sisters so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.